Los Angeles, a city of lights where the glow never fades. Among its luxury lives a young heiress named Elena Dawson, the only daughter of Richard Dawson, the cold yet gentle billionaire behind one of America's top tech companies, Dawson Tech. Her mother died when she was just 6, and since then Elena's life revolved around opulence and the unconditional spoiling of her father. Elena grew up like a princess in a glass tower. Except this princess was temperamental, rebellious, and stubborn. She had fired 5 drivers, 3 tutors, and 7 bodyguards in just 1 year, because I didn't like their attitude, she often claimed. But what really triggered her worst meltdown? Her father's new love. One evening, with candlelight still flickering on the dinner table, Richard gently said, "Isabel and I are getting married this summer." Elena set her wine glass down, her eyes turned cold. "She's younger than Mom, she just wants your money," she yelled, shattering the glass in her hand. The days that followed were chaos. Elena disappeared from home, partied all night, and appeared in tabloids with scandalous headlines. Shareholders began to panic, stocks dropped. Richard knew he was losing his daughter, and if he didn't act fast, he'd lose everything else too. In a quiet evening on the 45th floor, Richard met with Jason Cruz, a silent man with sharp eyes, built like a soldier. Not much was known about him, only that he had served as a private security advisor for high-profile figures. What shocked Richard was Jason's volunteering for the job of being Elena's bodyguard. "You're sure? She's not exactly pleasant company. Everyone I hired ran away within days," Richard warned. Jason only smiled. "If you truly want her to change, then quitting isn't an option." The agreement was made. But Elena had no idea that Jason wasn't just a bodyguard. He was the grandson of Don Emilio Montgomery, the largest investor of Dawson Tech, the one who could influence who runs the company if Richard steps down. Yet Richard's plan wasn't just about hiring a bodyguard. It was about setting up a secret arranged marriage if Jason could succeed in changing Elena's heart. Elena stood at the gates of her mansion, arms crossed, eyes blazing like she was ready to set the world on fire. In front of her stood a tall man in a crisp black shirt, sunglasses on, posture as rigid as a flagpole. He said nothing, only offered a slight nod when she sized him up from head to toe. "Was it supposed to be another one Dad hired?" Elena scoffed. Jason didn't reply. Richard stepped out the front door with a strained smile. "Elena, this is Jason Cruz, your new bodyguard. From today on, he goes wherever you go." "Again, a bodyguard? Dad, what am I, a toddler?" Elena shouted, storming into the house, but not before kicking Jason's suitcase aside like a welcoming gift. She did everything in her power to get rid of Jason. Woke up late just to make him wait. Pretended to be allergic to his cologne. The quieter Jason was, the more it irritated her. "I don't get why my dad hired someone like you. Are you mute?" she said as they sat in the car heading to an event. Jason replied calmly, "I speak when necessary." "Then speak now. Why'd you even take this job? Do you know who I am? I'll have you begging to quit in 3 days." Jason turned to her, eyes locked. "I don't beg, and you're not as special as you think." Her eyes widened. No one had ever spoken to her like that, and annoyingly, her heart skipped a beat. A week later, disaster struck. Photos of Elena with Benji, her troubled ex, at an underground club hit the tabloids. Stocks tanked. The board panicked. Richard was furious. "That's it. Jason, get her out of here. Now." "What do you mean, get her out?" Elena protested. "Anywhere but LA, far away from trouble." Within the hour, Jason was loading her suitcase into the SUV. Elena screamed, kicked, cursed, but the car sped out of the Dawson estate. "Elena Dawson," Jason said, "I'm not your usual bodyguard. My mission is to make sure you don't destroy yourself. And if it takes illegal kidnapping, so be it." "You have no right," she yelled. Jason looked straight ahead, unfazed. "Your father signed full guardianship over to me. I have complete authority for the next 3 months." "You're insane." "Maybe, but you'll remember these 3 months for the rest of your life." And so began the wild journey of a spoiled heiress and a mysterious bodyguard, headed for a remote seaside town called Seabbrook Bay, where everything Elena knew would be turned upside down. Seabbrook Bay, a remote seaside town in Northern California, where only the sound of waves, wind, and seagulls could be heard. No fancy restaurants, no shopping malls, and absolutely no Wi-Fi. Elena stepped out of the SUV, eyes wide in disbelief, as if Jason had just transported her back to the Stone Age. In front of her stood a small wooden shack, topped with palm leaves, its weathered walls barely holding on. A few dying plants sat in pots outside. In the distance was the open ocean, a brilliant blue, but she didn't care to look. All she saw was horror. "This is your idea of a retreat?" Elena gasped, disgust dripping from her voice. "Not a retreat," Jason corrected. "A home." "You're insane. This place looks worse than a parking lot's changing room." Jason didn't respond. He simply carried the bags inside as if everything was perfectly normal. Elena stood frozen in the sand, convinced she had been dragged onto some survival reality show. When she finally entered the shack, she let out a dramatic groan. No way. Inside was a bamboo bed, an old squeaky ceiling fan, and no air conditioner, no TV, and most importantly, nowhere to charge her iPhone. "Internet?" she asked, a last flicker of hope in her voice. "No signal. You'll survive," Jason replied like he was commenting on the weather. The first 3 days were pure hell. Elena screamed when she discovered the outdoor shower. "I'm not bathing with butterflies and snakes." She almost broke her back slipping on wet sand, because of course she wore high heels to the beach. Jason caught her, but she shoved him away. "I don't need your help. I need a private jet out of this dump." For their first meal, Jason grilled fish and steamed greens. Elena stared at the fish, eyes still intact, and pushed the plate away. "I eat sashimi, not something that stares back at me." "Then go hungry." And she did, for 2 meals straight, until her stomach growled so loud it echoed in the hut. Still, she kept her pride. At midnight, she crept into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Nothing. Just cold rice and a few dried fish fillets. In desperation, she nibbled on a piece of fish and nearly choked. Just then, Jason appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking. "Not quite Nobu, is it?" Elena almost threw the pot at his head. But he didn't tease her further, he simply poured her a glass of water and placed it on the counter. Their contrast was stark. She was loud, reactive, firecracker energy. He was calm, controlled, like a steady tide. When she tossed her clothes everywhere, Jason silently folded them. When she shrieked over a cockroach, Jason said seriously, "They lived here before you." When she ran around trying to find a phone signal and bumped her head into a tree, Jason knelt to check the bruise, not scolding, just placing a hand on her forehead and saying, "Relax, not hard enough to knock out what little sense you have left." Elena was equal parts embarrassed and oddly touched. Being taken care of without being mocked felt new, something she hadn't felt since her mother died. One night, while attempting to cook a creative dinner with instant noodles, lemon juice, and chili powder, she nearly set the hut on fire. Smoke filled the space. Jason rushed in, flung the pot outside, opened the windows, and looked at her like a child who'd just discovered matches. She pouted, eyes brimming. "I was just trying to make a decent meal." Jason didn't scold her. He simply wiped the ash off her cheek and pulled out another pot. Clean and ready. "Let's try again." That night, a power outage swept through the village. Jason sat on the porch, reading by candlelight. Elena wrapped herself in a shawl, hugging a pillow, and sat across from him. "Why are you always so quiet?" she asked. Jason looked at her. "Because when people scream too much, silence is necessary." "Have you ever been in love?" "Yes." "What was she like?" "Like you, but a better listener." Elena fell completely silent. Her cheeks burned. She wasn't sure whether to yell, cry, or smile. The next morning, she made breakfast for Jason. boiled eggs and slightly burnt toast. Jason ate every bite without complaint. "Not bad," he said. "Are you just pitying me?" "No, I'm tasting your honesty." Elena looked away, but her heart thudded. For the first time in her 23 years, she felt happy cooking for someone. From that day forward, things changed. No more screaming. Elena woke up earlier, hung laundry, even learned to fish from the old men nearby. Jason didn't speak much, but every small gesture made her feel seen, for real. Not the way tabloids flashed her face across covers, not like how her father paraded her at corporate galas. Jason saw her as a person learning how to live. And for the first time, Elena thought maybe simple living wasn't so bad. Mornings in Seabbrook Bay always began with the sound of crashing waves and the rich scent of coffee brewing in Jason's old kettle. Elena would usually wake later, hair tousled, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, dragging her feet to the porch like a grumpy cat. But the difference now was she no longer snapped at the world. Instead, she'd sit next to Jason, accept a steaming cup of coffee, sigh deeply, and ask, "Think it's going to rain today?" It was a meaningless question, but Jason always answered seriously, like she were some weather analyst. Sometimes he'd point to the sky and describe the clouds. Elena didn't care about cloud types, but she liked hearing his voice. She couldn't say when it all started. Maybe it was when he caught her mid-fall, or treated her burn without a word, or just the way he looked at her, like she wasn't a burden. No one had ever looked at her that way, not her ex-boyfriends, not her father, not even the media. One evening, while they sat by the fire pit behind the shack, flames crackling gently, Elena suddenly asked, "Jason, if I weren't Richard Dawson's daughter, would you still want to know me?" Jason stared into the fire and answered slowly, "I don't care who you are, I care about who you choose to be." Elena said nothing. Her heart didn't race, it slowed down, like settling into a calm it had never known before. A few days later, heavy rain fell over Seabbrook Bay. For the first time, the winds were biting cold. Elena curled up in a thin blanket on her bed, too proud to admit she was freezing. She didn't want Jason to think she was being needy. But late that night, he opened her door, walked in without a word, and gently placed a thick coat over her shoulders. "Elena," he said from the doorway, "taking care of yourself isn't asking for too much. It's what you deserve." It was the first time he called her by her first name, and it felt like someone had unlocked a quiet, protected part of her heart. In the afternoons, they'd walk along the shore. Jason didn't hold her hand. He didn't steal glances, but somehow his presence made her feel safer than she ever had before. Elena began to talk more. She spoke of her mother, a gentle woman who loved oil painting and used to hum while cooking. She said that after her mother passed away, her father became a stranger, full of discipline but empty of warmth. Jason didn't interrupt. He just listened. But Elena could feel that he understood. "Do you think I'm selfish?" she asked one day, her eyes fixed on the tide. "No," he replied. "I think no one ever taught you how to love anyone besides yourself." Elena smiled. "And now you're learning." One night, after a simple dinner of vegetable soup and bread, Jason pulled something from his pocket, a tiny ring made of copper wire and a seashell. "What's this?" Elena asked suspiciously. "A promise," Jason said. "Not a proposal. Just, if there's ever a day when you're ready to love someone without fear of being hurt, maybe you'll think of me." She took the ring not to wear it, but to hold it tight in her palm. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm starting to learn that." Jason nodded, then walked off the porch, leaving her alone beneath the moonlight. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, standing barefoot before the sea, letting the waves wash over her feet. Her chest felt weightless. Finally, she admitted it to herself, not because he was handsome, not because they were isolated together, but because she felt something real. For the first time in her life, she wanted to be a better version of herself, not for her father, not for public image, but for Jason. The next morning, something changed in her reflection. She didn't look perfect, but she looked real. She washed the dishes without being asked, hung clothes under the sun, even swept the porch. That afternoon, while folding laundry, she spoke again. "When I was a kid," she began, "I used to think, if I behaved better, maybe Dad wouldn't work so much." Jason said nothing right away. He picked up a towel, folded it with her, then looked into her eyes. "Your father didn't pull away because you weren't good enough. He pulled away because he didn't know how to handle grief, just like you're learning to live again." His words hit her harder than she expected. In that moment, she wanted to hug him, not out of love, but out of understanding. That afternoon, Seabrook's ocean shimmered beneath a golden sunset. The sun melted into the horizon, casting soft ribbons of orange, violet, and amber across the water. Elena sat on the sand, hugging her knees, while Jason sat a few feet away, close enough to hear each other breathe, but far enough to respect the space between them. "Do you always watch sunsets like this?" Elena asked softly. "No," Jason replied. "Only when there's someone to share it with." Elena smiled faintly, eyes still on the waves. "So, I'm the first?" "Not the first, but the first who made me want to stay this long." His words drifted like a breeze, but they tightened something in Elena's chest. She turned toward him. Jason wasn't looking at her, but his hand clenched slightly in the sand, as if holding himself back. "Jason." He turned slowly. His gaze was steady, deep as the sea. "Elena, I don't know when it started, but every day I spend here, I want to leave less and less. You don't need to be perfect. Just being yourself is enough to make me stay." Elena felt her heart crack open, not from pain, but from finally feeling something real. No performance, no rush, no conditions. She didn't speak. She simply leaned her head gently against his shoulder. The ocean breeze wrapped around them like a secret. Jason didn't move. Minutes passed. Then he spoke, his voice low and sure. "Elena, I'm not perfect, but I promise I won't touch you, not even a hug, until the day you're my wife. I respect you, and I want you to be loved the way you truly deserve." Elena said nothing, but tears fell silently onto the sand, not from sadness, but because her heart had finally found a place to rest. Time in Seabbrook Bay was not measured by clocks, but by the little things Elena learned each day. Morning, waking up early, practicing deep breathing, and making coffee for both of them. Afternoon, hanging out the laundry, cleaning the yard, helping Jason cook. Evening, walking, talking, and listening, more than reacting. No one made her do these things. Jason never asked, but Elena volunteered because for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. One day, Jason had a fever after getting caught in the rain at sea. He lay curled up on the bed, his forehead burning. Elena frantically cooked porridge, mixed medicine, found towels to wipe him down. Things she had never done for anyone, not even for herself. "Do you know? I used to not remember how to open a can of fish," she said, as she placed a cool towel on Jason's forehead. Jason chuckled. "Now I know how to lower a fever." Elena looked at him, her eyes both gentle and proud. "Because I want to learn." The next morning, Jason woke up, his health gradually recovering. He sat up, looking at the tidy house, the table set. Elena was washing the dishes, her hair tied up, wearing an old t-shirt and shorts, simple but more radiant than any designer dress he had ever seen her wear. "Elena?" he called softly. She turned around. "What's wrong?" Jason looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "You're different." She didn't deny it. She just nodded, very slowly, and said, "It's not because anyone made me change. It's because I want to be a version of myself that I can be proud of." Time in Seabbrook Bay didn't tick by with clocks, but with quiet moments, and the little things Elena learned every day. Morning, she woke early, took deep breaths, and made coffee for both of them. Afternoon, she hung laundry, swept the porch, helped Jason cook. Evening, they walked, talked, and she listened more than she reacted. No one asked her to do any of it. Jason never demanded, but Elena did it because she wanted to. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly living. One afternoon, when the sun was melting into the horizon and the Seabbrook sky was bathed in amber light, Jason told her to close her eyes. "I have something for you." Elena smirked. "Not another fishing lie bracelet, I hope." "No. This one is more important." When she opened her eyes, Jason was kneeling on the sand, holding out a small ring made of a seashell and copper wire, catching the golden sunset like a secret promise. "Elena," he said, "I don't have a mansion, I'm not in Forbes, and I can't offer you a luxury life. But I have love, and a heart you've helped heal." His voice didn't shake. No theatrics, just truth. "If you're not ready, I'll wait. I swear I will. But if there's a part of you that believes we could build something extraordinary but real, then will you marry me?" Elena didn't cry. She just smiled. Soft. Honest. It was the first time a smile ever felt like home. "I don't need anything else, except you." Then she nodded. Jason stood and gently slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't expensive. But it was the first ring that made her feel truly valued. That night, they sat on the porch, fingers intertwined. "I can't hide forever," Elena said, eyes on the water. "Ellie is still waiting. My father is still waiting, and I think it's time to go back." Jason nodded. "I know, but this time you won't go back alone." Their return wasn't grand, no paparazzi, no press releases. Elena and Jason arrived in Los Angeles quietly, just the way they had left. Richard Dawson stood waiting in his office. When Elena stepped inside, he rose to his feet. No scolding, no lectures. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Better than ever," Elena replied, steady and clear. She set her purse down, walked over and hugged him, something she hadn't done since she was 14. "I'm ready now, but I'm doing this on my terms." Richard tightened his arms around her. "That's all I ever hoped for." Weeks later, an official announcement was sent to the board. Elena Dawson would take over as the new CEO of Dawson Enterprises. On her finger, the seashell ring rested quietly. No one at the boardroom table noticed. But she knew it was the most valuable thing she had ever worn. On the rooftop of Dawson Tower, overlooking the city lights of LA, Elena and Jason stood side by side. "Do you ever wish you'd fallen for someone simpler? Someone easier to love?" Jason smiled and squeezed her hand. "If this is what messy looks like, then I'd choose it every day for the rest of my life." The wind ran through her hair. The city below sparkled with artificial brilliance. But in Elena's eyes, nothing shone brighter than Jason's gaze. The girl who once ran from the world had come back with a wiser heart, a real love, and a truth she had never believed before. She was worthy of love, and strong enough to love in return. Elena's return to Los Angeles sent a quiet shockwave through the business world. Once called the runaway heiress, she was now officially nominated by Richard Dawson to become the next CEO of Dawson Enterprises. The press conference was discreet but powerful. Richard stood beside his daughter, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "I believe Elena will continue the legacy I built, not because she's my daughter, but because she's found her own strength." Polite applause followed. Elena smiled, not to impress, but because she finally believed in herself. No one in the room could have imagined that just a year ago she had been dismissed as a failure. That night, at a small private celebration, Benji, Eleanor's ex-boyfriend, appeared. He looked as dashing as ever, but there was a strange shadow behind his charming smile. Elena tensed slightly, but kept her composure. "You look different," Benji said, swirling a glass of wine. "Because I'm living for real now." "I thought I knew you," he murmured, "but maybe I want to know this version better." Elena didn't respond. She turned to leave, but Benji grabbed her wrist. Jason appeared almost instantly, his voice calm but cutting. You've got your hand on the wrong woman, Benji smirked. Just saying hello to an old friend. 2 days later, Elena vanished after a meeting with the finance team. No calls, no texts. Her car was abandoned in the parking garage. Panic spread quickly. Richard Dawson received an anonymous email. $2 billion or she disappears forever. Don't call the cops, we're watching you. Jason read the message, his face stone cold. He knew instantly Benji was behind this. Where is she? Richard demanded, visibly shaken. Jason answered, steady as steel. I'll bring her back, safe. What are you planning to do? Jason glanced at him, his eyes blazing. What any man would do, for the woman he loves. Using underground contacts and sharp deduction, Jason traced Elena's location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He didn't call the police. He went alone. No weapons, just willpower and skill. Inside, Elena was bound, tape over her mouth, terrified. Benji stood over her with 2 guards, talking into a burner phone about the money. Jason stepped into the warehouse, calm as ever. Cut the price, he said. She's not worth $2 billion. She's worth my entire life. Benji sneered. Well, the bodyguard plays the hero. What do you think you're gonna do? Jason didn't reply. He acted. In under a minute, both gods were on the ground, groaning. Benji pulled a knife, but Jason moved faster. He fought with the precision of a trained elite, not out of rage, but focus. In the end, Benji was tied up with the very rope he'd used on Elena. Jason rushed to her, peeled the tape from her lips. Jason, she gasped, how did you find me? Because I was never going to lose you. When they returned to Dawson Tower, Richard was already waiting outside. He watched Jason help Elena out of the car, and for the first time, he truly saw the man beside his daughter. Jason looked him straight in the eye. It's time you knew the truth. I'm Jason Cruz-Montgomery, heir to Montgomery Holdings and the largest stakeholder in your company. Richard was stunned. You're Michael Montgomery's son? Yes, but today I'm just a man who loves Elena, and I came not to protect her fortune, but to see if she could stand on her own. Richard said nothing for a long time, but his silence wasn't disapproval, it was acceptance. Elena took Jason's hand. Her eyes didn't shine because of Jason's name, they shined because she believed in him. That night, back in their apartment, Elena traced the little seashell ring on her finger. How long were you hiding that from me? From the beginning, Jason said, because I needed you to love the man, not the name. Elena smiled softly. Then I chose right. Jason leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, and I chose the right heart. That morning, the Dawson Enterprises boardroom was thick with tension. The vote to appoint Elena Dawson as official CEO had been scheduled. She stood at the head of the long table, hands gripping her presentation folder, her gaze firm. Gone was the girl who once cried on the beaches of Seabbrook. One by one, the votes were cast. The results were read aloud. 5 votes in favor, 5 votes against. Silence fell like a weight. The chairman cleared his throat. As per policy, in the case of a tie, the larger shareholder has the right to cast the deciding vote. All eyes turned to Richard Dawson, but he simply shook his head. I am no longer the largest shareholder, he said. That title belongs to Montgomery Holdings. A murmur swept the room. Then a voice spoke from behind Elena. All cast the final vote. Jason appeared in the doorway, dressed in a simple gray suit but radiating a quiet power. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen him since the rescue, and now he stood like a force of nature, calm but unstoppable. Jason Cruz-Montgomery, he said calmly, representing Montgomery Holdings, the owner of 38% of Dawson Enterprises. Elena turned, frozen in disbelief. Jason gave her a soft, steady smile and declared, Montgomery Holdings votes in favor of Elena Dawson as official CEO. A wave of murmurs and exclamations rippled through the room. The chairman stood, voice clear. With majority support, Elena Dawson is hereby named Chief Executive Officer of Dawson Enterprises." Elena stood still. She turned to Jason, lips trembling, eyes glassy, her knees buckled, not from shock, but from the overwhelming feeling of being chosen, believed in. Then the world went black. When she opened her eyes, everything was white. Beside her hospital bed, Jason held her hand tightly, his face etched with worry. "What happened?" she murmured. "You fainted. Too much pressure." The doctor entered, holding a chart and smiling kindly. "Good news. Nothing serious. But Miss Elena should get more rest, especially during the first trimester." Elena frowned. First trimester of what? Jason lifted his head, looked at the doctor, then back at her, and said softly, "Elena, you're pregnant." Time seemed to pause. Elena stared at him, then slowly lowered her gaze to her hand resting on her stomach. For the first time, she wasn't a CEO, not a heiress, not a misunderstood daughter. She was simply a mother-to-be, and next to her was the man who had loved her not for her name, but for her heart. She squeezed Jason's hand, eyes glistening, but her smile, it was radiant like the sunrise over Seabbrook long ago. In the final months of her pregnancy, Elena began to see everything with a gentler heart, including the past. She reached out to visit her stepmother, the woman she had avoided for years. Their conversation happened on a rainy afternoon. No anger, no blame, just two women quietly touching the same loneliness. "I never wanted to replace your mother," the woman said, eyes glistening. "I know, and thank you for being there for Dad when I couldn't." They embraced, and for the first time, Elena understood that love doesn't always show up the right way, but it's still real. The first wedding was in Los Angeles, elegant, grand, filled with people from the finance world and media. The second was small and intimate, held in Seabbrook Bay, the place Elena once hated, but now called home. Jason stood by the ocean, hands trembling slightly as he made his vow. "I promise to love you, not because you're perfect, but because you've always had the courage to face your imperfections." Elena smiled, her eyes softer than the sea. "I promise to make your coffee every morning and to love you the way the sea loves the sun, without conditions, just presence." The final scene is a small cottage by the shore. Jason opens the door. Elena steps inside, one hand gently resting on her belly. The scent of salt and wood welcomed them home. She looked around and whispered, "We made it." Jason smiled and they both laughed, quietly, fully, like a promise kept. This is where it began, and now it's where they'll build their home.